At a time when people are waking up more than ever to the sexual abuse that many children around the world face, whether it be through sex trafficking, family friends, or even members of their own family, Tammy Mitchell has agreed to share her story in hopes that it will bring attention to the problem as well as to help people protect their families and break cycles. But this is not solely a story of a child who was victimized, but how a young woman, out of terrible circumstance, found her way to becoming victorious. During this recording, I had some difficulty with equipment, leading to some sections having less than optimal audio. But please do not let that deter you from listening to Tammy's incredible story, and if you would like to help stories like this reach more people, please like and subscribe. Now, if you will, please join me as we go and meet Tammy Mitchell. I'm here with Tammy Mitchell. She agreed to do an interview with me. Billy Lanier set this up, and I don't know too much about her story, so I'm just going to let her tell it, and then if I have anything to ask or add, I'll do that at the end. So, if you would.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. And this story, yes, Billy and I were in a conversation that led to him wanting to make this introduction. And this is actually the first time I've shared this story on a podcast. So I will, the story is really about protecting our children and breaking cycles. And the impact that comes that we don't see. So I guess to be real frank and direct about it, when I was 7, 8, 9 years old, I was molested by my mother's brother. And it was very traumatizing, but at the same time, it was very confusing, very overwhelming. So I think I've come to realize that it's not just the abuse in the moment that is so traumatic. And there are emotions and complexities that impact us. And I'm now 50 years old, and I'm still healing. I'm still realizing things. I'm still becoming a better person through that. One of the things that I experienced, because it was a secret, right? It's a secret. You're a child. You're being abused. It's a secret. People don't know what's going on. They don't know that that your parents are overwhelmed with their life. I'm the oldest of 6 children, and my grandparents lived near my elementary school, and so it was easier at times for my sister and I, who went to the school near my grandparents, to just stay at my grandparents' house. Well, no one knew that there was an abuser, or nobody addressed it if they did know. I'm not going to say nobody knew. I think people had their suspicions or concerns, but nobody did anything. Nobody spoke up. Nobody thought about it. Nobody wanted to believe. More importantly, nobody wanted to believe that a family member would violate and damage and destroy the purity of 2 little girls and their friends. It wasn't just us. There were other people. There were multiple victims. When you're speaking with somebody, when you see somebody who's a cancer survivor or going through cancer, or somebody who's been mutilated in some tragic accident, they've lost an arm, a leg, an eye, you can see their trauma. You can empathize and sympathize, and you can want to support, want to hear their story, want to encourage those people, right? When somebody's damage is strictly in their soul, they look whole, they've got a smile on their face, they're thriving in life, but you don't see the damage done to their soul. That was one of the hardest things, was trying to figure out normal and trying to relate to the world and trying to be seen when I didn't even know who I was myself, especially in my younger years, and feeling very lost, very confused. I felt responsible for a lot of things that I wasn't responsible for. I felt responsible for protecting my siblings and trying my hardest. After the abuse had gone on for some time, I was 9 years old, and I was committed to ending it. At 9, I decided this was going to end. And I went to bed on the couch. My sister and I always slept in the living room on the hide-a-bed and the couch at my grandparents'. And it was an old 1940s pier and beam house. And my uncle would usually come in late at night after we were asleep from being out and about. He'd come in the house, walk through the house, go to his bedroom. But he always came out later, like after everybody was asleep. And I just remember the creaks. I never fell asleep when I was at my grandparents' house because all I could hear were the creaks of the house. And I would hear him moving through the house, and I would hear him go into the hall, and the floor would creak. And I would hear him go into the kitchen and through the swinging door into the dining room. And then there's a creak again in the threshold between the dining room and the living room. And I would just lay there with my back to him, cringing, praying he wouldn't touch me. Just let me be asleep. Walk in there, look at me if you must, but go away. And the last time he ever touched me, I was laying there in bed with a butcher knife. And I was committed to protecting myself. And he never saw the knife. I don't think he saw the knife, but I told when he pulled my shoulder and tried to pull me towards him, and I pulled back, and I said, "You have to stop. Don't do this to me." And I'm crying and shaking, and my voice cracked. And he starts crying, and he's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And I said, "You have to leave us alone. Don't touch any of us. Don't hurt us anymore. You can't do this." And nothing ever happened again when I was around, but it didn't end. I didn't know whether or not it ended because nobody wants to talk about it. My sister didn't want to talk about it. We both knew it, but there was this unspoken, let's not talk about that. Let's not address that. It's like a boogeyman story that's true, but you want to pretend it's not. And when I was 14, there's nothing worse than going through puberty in general, right? Those are hard years. Your skin breaks out, your body's changing, you're as gawky and awkward as can be, your teeth are strange, nothing fits right, and I'm tall. I was tall and skinny. I was the tallest girl by 7th grade. I was already 5'9" and weighed 110 pounds. And then I start getting boobs. It's like, and then what happens is the boys go from wanting to pick on you and pull your hair to they want to flirt with you, and they want to play spin the bottle, and they want to touch you. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was having a PTSD-like response. And I was really not doing well with the social agenda of my peers. The girls wanting to get all dressed up and have a good time and flaunt their new curves. And we're young, we're silly. We're reading 17 magazine and think we know everything. And all I wanted to do was cover up and hide and crawl into a hole and not be seen. And it was affecting my schoolwork, my grades, and I was very talented, very gifted. I had excellent grades with very minimal effort, but I couldn't focus. I couldn't get things done. And my lack of ability to connect or communicate anywhere I went was right in my face. It was just, I just felt like I didn't belong anywhere. I didn't belong at home because at home I was the family witch, because I was defiant and guarded, and really all I was trying to do was be a mama bear to all my siblings and to myself. And by this time my uncle has gone on to get married. His wife is expecting their first child. You have to remember, through all of this, our families are still interacting. Nobody knows there's a problem. he's a very regular presence in my life, and I'm going along to get along as much as I can. But there are times that I was a little more guarded and a little more difficult, or if my parents went out of town and they wanted my aunt and uncle to stay at my house with us, I resisted. I put up a fight. My parents could not stand how difficult I was, and I couldn't explain why. And finally, one day, I had to go to tutorials for school, and my teacher, she was kind of crazy, but she was very intent, and she was just she was literally banging on my desk. Why don't you get this? What is wrong? Why have you fallen so far behind? This is not like you. And I just burst into tears. I just lost, and she's like, whoa, this is not tear worthy. This is math. And, I just said, I can't do anything. I just want to die. And she's like, oh my gosh, this is just math. What is wrong? This is just math. And I just told her, I said, I can't carry this anymore. And I did not like this teacher, but she just kept pushing, and I cracked, and I shared with her some of the story. And of course, then she had an obligation to bring in the authorities. So the police are involved. My parents get called up to the school, find the police there. It's shocking. It's embarrassing. It's shocking and embarrassing for me, reliving everything. Everybody's like, why are the police here? What's going on? Then there are all these stories about what's going on at my house. And my sister gets roped into it. She's hitting me. She's so angry. She doesn't want to have these conversations. Just leave it all alone, Tammy. Just leave it all alone. And then the church, my parents' church, gets involved. The minister. Everybody starts asking questions, and you have to relive everything all over again. And then, for me, nobody even listened. Like, they heard me. And my parents, you could tell they were grieving. My mom wanted to know why. Why didn't I tell her? Why didn't I come to them? They love me, right? Yeah, I know they love me. This isn't the kind of story you just go, hey, I need to talk to you. Let me knock on your door. And you reach a point where it's like, there's this, you've been abused, and now you're celebrating Thanksgiving and Christmas and birthdays together, and you feel so confused and perplexed, like, am I fueling this? Am I causing the problem? But the truth has to be told, and I was also quite fearful that his child might be a daughter that he might abuse. I was so worried about, like, what's next, and church minister pulls me into a meeting room, just he and I. It was completely inappropriate. An older man, gray hair. Yeah, I've known him all my life that I can remember, but he had no business cornering me in a room and asking me, are you sure this really happened? You see, at the time that I decided to have my nervous breakdown because I was dealing with being a teenager and not coping with the shift of life for me, my parents and grandparents were in a legal dispute. And so everybody at the church and in my extended family decided that I was just trying to draw attention away from their fight and put the spotlight on me. And so I was dismissed, even though my parents believed it. And of course, what did my dad want to do? My dad wanted to kill the guy. And my mom, wonderful, large-hearted, giant-hearted woman, she's the next to the oldest of 6 kids. This is her next to the youngest baby brother. She wants to forgive. She doesn't want a bigger family dispute and more problems with the family. And I don't know what it was like when she was growing up. Since then I've learned her dad did things that were inappropriate with women in his community, in his life. And there were other people in the family. There was other abuse in the family, other inappropriate behaviors. And I won't say to what extent they went, but they were unacceptable, inappropriate things. And there was no legal action taken, no pressing charges, no jail time. And all I felt was abused and neglected and abandoned again. And I felt like my voice didn't matter, and I had to kind of figure out how to navigate life with this. Okay, now we all know there's a pedophile among us, and we're going to okay that. I wasn't okay with it.
Sorry.
But they seemed okay with it. My grandfather told me, they picked me up to take me to go buy a dress for the Junior National Honor Society awards presentations. And I'll never forget, I got in their minivan, and both my grandparents were like, we need to talk about this. And sometimes things aren't what we think they are. Things aren't always what they seem. And maybe you just misunderstood. And I asked them to stop the car and let me out, and I promptly got out and walked back home. It was only a couple of blocks, but my parents didn't have the money to go buy me a dress. My grandparents were doing this thing for me, but I didn't want a dress from them. I didn't want to have the conversation. I didn't want to be called a liar. I didn't want to be ignored. I didn't want to who wants to say these things happen to you and then be told you don't know what you're talking about? And I started closing doors. I started closing access. I was 14 years old and started closing access to people. I walked away from the church that we were in. I walked away from my family. There were times I had to see them because I was only 14, 15, and I didn't have total control over all of my environment all the time, but it became a very managed relationship between me and other people. And I remember one day I was very distraught. I was very suicidal, actually. I overdosed on Advil. And I just wanted everything to end. I wanted all the pain to end. I wanted all the uncertainty to end. I wanted my indifference and my irrelevance to end. And I didn't want to be the family witch anymore, which, by the way, I have learned how to remove labels. That was never a label for me to own, and I took it off a long time ago. But I actually had a huge heart. And cared very much. I cared very much about myself, my siblings. I cared so much that I let my parents live in their lie. But I overdosed on pills, and I was so sick. Oh my gosh. It was horrible, and nobody knew. Nobody knew I was throwing up. My mom thought I had the flu. I was throwing up. I had a headache for days. I would tell you, I don't know this because I don't frequent doctors, but I do know I have some complications with my liver, and I'm fairly certain it's a result of that day. And somehow, by the grace of God, I survived that. And I decided that as I was coming out of that, and I was looking around my life, and my dad listened to Zig Ziglar and a couple of other motivational speakers, Jim Rohn, Zig Ziglar, Brian Tracy, but Zig Ziglar was on a lot, and I had heard some things, and it was really in the background that I heard it, but something struck me, and I got down on my knees and prayed, and I can't remember all of the prayer, But I did pray for a lot of strength, and I prayed to change lives from the trauma, from the experience that I had been through. And I prayed to never let this happen to anybody I loved and cherished, and for me to be a protector and a champion as much as possible. And I stood up and said, I may be victimized in a moment, but I will not be a victim. I will not live as a victim. I will seek victory, and I am victorious. And that has been my motto on my heart since I was 16 years old. And so there are many layers of the story. That's just kind of the beginning, but I don't know how much time we have or if you have questions.
I mean, this is long form. So I guess one of my questions is there ever a time where your family kind of comes to terms with what happens?
Everybody has acknowledged that I spoke the truth. Even in the last 2 years, I've had an aunt. So both my parents have passed, okay? Mm-hmm. But in the last couple of years, I had an aunt. She always invites me to Thanksgiving, and I had moved away for about 15, 18 years. When I moved back, she would always invite me over for Thanksgiving. My uncle moved away from the area through the years. When I moved back, he wasn't here. He's still not here. He had moved to Alaska, and now he's in the Pacific Northwest. And he has a sister there, one of my aunts, and my cousins there. And but my aunt here, she always would invite me to Thanksgiving, and I would say, oh. And I did have a very close relationship with this aunt. And I would say, well, who's coming? And she would start listing off people, and she would say that he was invited. And I said, absolutely not. I don't understand how and I will tell them, I do not understand how he's invited. I do not understand how he's welcome in the family. Not only do we all acknowledge that he molested and violated myself, my sister, her friend, one of my friends, but also after his first marriage ended, in his second marriage, that woman had an 8-year-old daughter when he married her. And I don't know her, but I know that he did things to her that damaged that young lady and led to the divorce of that marriage. And it was shortly after that, I believe, he moved to Alaska. I mean, I know there are stories. The ripples are real. The ripples of what people do is significant. The impact it's had on me, on my sister, and my sister and I live very different lives, and that's another story, but I always talk about a tale of two sisters. I've been victorious. My sister is a victim. And people get very disgruntled with her. I love her, and I'm not happy with how she lives her life, but I have great empathy for her, and I am very angry at him because he destroyed so much of her soul and so much of her innocence and so much of her purity, and you can't get that back. And when you lose that as a 6-year-old little girl, and you think your only worth is in the sexual to whatever person will pay attention to you, it's horrible. It's just horrible. And she uses sex as a tool to survive. So there have been many layers of incidents. The family does acknowledge it's real, but there's never been accountability. I've made it very clear he's not welcome to, like when my mother passed away a few years ago, I made it very clear if he showed up, I would have him arrested and I would press charges. And I don't know what the statute of limitations is on these things, to be honest with you. He's out of sight, out of mind for me, and I've kind of left it to, he's up in the Pacific Northwest, I'm in Texas. But lately I feel maybe I should do something. Who's going to take? I have a hard time believing he's not still offending.
Yeah.
Pedophiles are pedophiles.
Yeah. So, I guess let's take it from this period where you're been victimized. You go through this. It's believed but not acted upon. And you've decided, you're going to be victorious. So what's your pathway to victory from this point?
As a teenager, well, teenagers are interesting. I was fortunate enough that my mom had an exchange student company. I went abroad for almost a year. I went to Denmark, where my Danish does not come in handy very often. But I went there speaking nothing. I came home speaking about a 4 or 5 year old level of Danish, and to this day love getting to practice it and engaging with my Danish friends. But a lot of things got put into motion with that move to Denmark. I was very fortunate. I would say I had my first real mentor there. My best friend's dad spoke fluent English. He was a very astute, very wise man, and I was very shy. I was very, very, very shy. I really just wanted to be wallpaper. I loved watching people. I loved observing people, and I could smile and enjoy it from a distance. And my friend's dad, Mr. Jorgensen, it's Mr. Gategård. I want to say his first name, but I can't say it well. It's very Danish. So Mr. Gategård, he said to me one day, he goes, "Tammy, why are you sitting back there? Why are you just sitting and watching?" A bunch of our friends, our classmates from school, are all gathered around, hanging out, playing cards, talking, eating, drinking sodas and pastries and whatever Danes do. We're having a good time, and music, there's lots of music playing, some Depeche Mode, U2. I remember the moments vividly. And he says, why are you just sitting in the background? Why aren't you in the mix? Why are you over here? And I said, I'm good. I'm just taking in. I hadn't been in Denmark very long. I didn't speak any Danish at the time. And he said, I know you're good, but you're not doing. You're just being, but you're not doing. And life doesn't remember the just being there. They remember the doings. And I'm like, yeah, okay, all right, but I'm good. And he said, your legacy is not defined by you being good. Your legacy is defined by you being great and being a part of people's lives and doing great things and having an impact and being remembered and speaking up and having a voice. And you're not going to settle into your last days on earth being happy because you just sat and you were good. And it just was such a profound conversation we had and such an impact. And I said, well, I don't speak Danish. He goes, well, they all speak English. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to inconvenience. I don't want to impose. He goes, they need to practice their English. They're as uncomfortable with you as you are with them. Get in there and play. Play big. Play all out. He was so in my face. He was like this massive life coach before there were life coaches. And, but he just wouldn't take no for an answer. So I scooted on in, and you know what? I survived. And I made amazing friendships, and they would all laugh when I would say, I'm a girl from Texas, right? They've learned the Queen's tongue. They speak very proper British English. They've got this girl from East Texas, and I don't have a super strong accent, but strong enough for them, right? Yeah. And the silliest of questions they would ask. How do you get to school? Do you ride a horse? Do you have horses? Do you ride a horse to school? What do you eat? You start talking about Tex-Mex, they don't understand Tex-Mex in the least. They don't, at the time, peanut butter wasn't a thing over there. So there were just, it was so fun, the discovery, you know, and what I realized was, okay, I can be uncomfortable and have fun at the same time. I can be uncomfortable and make friends. I can not know the language and find common ground. And that experience really kind of bolstered me to move on to other next things where I became I was already very curious, but I became acutely curious and conversational. And I just wanted to talk to people. As a matter of fact, one of my friends I made a couple of years later, he called me K-TAM, like KLTV or what's the radio, KFRO radio station here in East Texas. He called me K-TAM, All Talk Radio. And I wanted to connect. I wanted to get to know people. I wanted to know what made them tick. I wanted to find our common ground. And what I found is I could dive really deep with people really fast, and people shared their most vulnerable stories with me, and they would share things, and I was just sort of I could empathize. And what I found was a lot of my life experiences, the good and the bad, had put me in a position to relate to people. And I was willing to do it. I was willing to be vulnerable. I was willing to care. I was willing to be curious. And I really went on a campaign to lead every engagement with a smile and curiosity. And that was really even fueled further when I was 26. My father took his own life. And that was another heavy, experience that I don't wish on anybody. So it's like, oh, okay, can we just add another layer of pain and grief and trauma? And I was with my dad. At the time I was living in California, but I had come to Texas for my brother's graduation and my sister's bridal shower. And I spent a lot of time with my dad. We went to lunch Saturday and Sunday, the weekend I was here. And he told me how he owed me a huge apology. And he owed me an apology for not doing more to protect me from my mom's family, from my uncle, but even from the behavior of the extended family members. And he hated that he hadn't done more. That he was amazed that in spite of all the things that he knew I had grown through, that I was unstoppable, that I could do anything I set my mind to, that I had the greatest strengths of my mom and dad. I was intelligent, I was social, I was engaging, I was brave, I wasn't afraid of anything. It's not to say I wasn't afraid of anything, but I have a secret to that. I'm actually very afraid of a lot of things, and especially back then, but I had this other little trick. And on top of being victorious, I had decided when I lived in Denmark, I had to find 10 seconds to brave. And so that was my thing. Like anytime I was really scared or uncomfortable in a moment, I was like, just 10 more seconds and we'll get through this. Just 10 more seconds, we'll win. Just 10 more seconds, we're victorious. And it's how I got through a lot of uncomfortable moments, and it's how I kind of pushed myself into situations like smile, be curious, be honest, have integrity, be brave. Just 10 seconds of brave, just 10 seconds. And it was amazing once I'd get through the 10 seconds how I was closer, 10 more seconds, 30 seconds. I'm halfway through a minute. Then I'm through a minute. Next thing you know, I'm through an hour. And next thing I'm good. And next thing I know, I'm great. And then I'm victorious. And so, but my dad recognized that, and he really valued how much I shined. And I appreciated him saying that. And he also apologized for not understanding me and loving me more during my bewitching years. And that he struggled with how direct I was, and he struggled with just how real I was, and he didn't know what to do with that. And I was his oldest. I was his little guinea pig, and he had a military background. He was an only child, and he believed in compliance and rules and expectations, and he also kind of beat his own drum, so he understood that I wasn't necessarily, he questioned everything, and he taught me to question everything. But it was hard for him to have a daughter who was so strong-willed, and in my own way, in my very afraid way, I was very brave. But I think more than anything was I didn't know how to be still, being compliant in a world, in a home, and in a family filled with risk and danger. And so I didn't feel safe there. And so it was a fight or flight response. And I chose to fight,
Mm-hmm.
and with love. It was all with love. But, so when my dad passed, I really, truly embraced the significance of a smile and being curious. And like when people say, "How are you?" I try really hard to not say I'm well or I'm good or I'm okay. I try really hard to be awesome or excellent or amazing or outstanding, because it just changes the tone. And I don't know what feelings or experiences or traumas are going on in the other person's life, but I'm trying to impact the energy in the room, right? Like, you ever walk into a room and it just feels like the energy is being sucked out of the room because the people are just flat? And one of my missions is to walk into a room and electrify it. Like, I want to be a magnet for superpower and super strength, and it's a choice, it is a choice. And I'm not saying I do it every time. There have been days I just don't have it in me, but when I show up, the world notices, right? When you show up, the world notices. When you show up, the world you can't help it. And when a baby's crying, you have two choices. You can let that baby cry and be miserable and you go a little bit crazy, or you can do something to change its perspective of its problem. And you know how fast you can change a baby's perspective? Like that. You play peekaboo, they go from crying to laughing in 30 seconds, right? You can do the same thing. And so it's just, those are I've just given myself these tips and tricks that I've implemented into my life. And even on my hardest days, I can be crying for 2 hours and somebody call me and, need me to do something, and I'm all in. I mean, if I believe in it, I love it, I'm excited, it's somebody I value and respect and trust, I'm all in. You'll never know I was crying for 2 hours. I don't need to sit and have a pity party with everybody. But it doesn't mean we don't have grief. It doesn't mean we don't have hard days. You just can't live in it. You can experience it, you can't live in it.
So I think this ties in off air. You mentioned something that seemed pretty significant. You were talking about breaking cycles and breaking the cycle in your own family. So
Yes.
What does that look like for you?
Breaking cycles is the most powerful thing you can do. Breaking bad cycles and creating new healthy cycles in your life. So for me, one was I had to cut off people in my life that I couldn't trust and respect. So I learned that I can love people from a distance, right? So I have an aunt that I love. I don't appreciate or respect the choices she makes related to my uncle. So I love her from a distance, And when I know I can see her in a safe environment and a safe time that works for both of us, then we have a visit. And I don't, if she wants to give me a speech or a lecture or wants to give me her 2 cents on how she thinks I should be handling forgiveness with regards to my uncle, I'm like, you're entitled to your opinion, and I'm entitled to mine, and but I've really had to learn to not be a sponge all the time, and sometimes I get to be a screen. So does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
I don't have to absorb everything people are giving me. I can be a screen and go, I hear you. Yep, I feel you, but not coming in. It's not, And I trust myself. I trust my beliefs, my boundaries, my values, my self-respect. It's taken a long time to realize I had self-contempt from all those years. I felt guilty for the complexity of the dynamics. I felt guilty for being friends with my uncle when truly I didn't know what to be. I was a 6, 7, 8, 10, 12, 14-year-old kid. I didn't know what to be with him. It's like, okay, you're supposed to love me. Is this love? I don't know how to treat you. I'm afraid of you. I want to love you because you're family and because you show up. And now you've got kids and I like your kids and I want to love your kids. And I'm supposed to be forgiving you, but I'm terrified of you. So I had to figure out for me what my boundaries were and what my expectations were for people to be in my safe space. Mm-hmm. And so I've learned to love people from a distance. And when my daughter was born, I have 3 brothers, and everything was too fresh and too raw for me at the time. I was 22 years old. I had this perfect baby girl, and I set my brothers down. I said, we need to have a talk. I need to be perfectly clear with you on something. I have this perfect baby girl. You have this amazing niece. You're going to love her forever. I said, but I need to be very sure of something. If you ever harm her, you make her feel unsafe, you touch her inappropriately, you do anything that makes me question your intentions and your desire, your feelings about her in any inappropriate way, I need you to know I'm not going to hurt you. I will kill you. And they're like, Tammy, like, I get it, I know. And I'm like, no. It's worth going to prison for. It's worth I want there to be no doubt, no question what my expectations are on what your relationship looks like with my daughter. And my daughter had a very safe, and I wasn't overprotective. I wasn't the helicopter mom. We did stuff. She did things. She had friends. But I raised her to be mindful of abuse in a very safe way. And I raised her to talk to me about anything, and she did. She does. To this day, she does. And the same with my son. And I've been very blessed and fortunate that nothing happened while she was on my watch. Unfortunately, in college, she had an incident with a young man, and unfortunately, these things happen. But she wasn't raped, but she was put in a compromised, scary position, and she felt violated and assaulted, and I hate that for her. But she was equipped more so than I was at her age, and she knew she could talk to me, and she knew that she needed to, find ways to grow through that as well. And she's great. Today she's great. But it's breaking cycles with awareness of what's acceptable and unacceptable, and being okay with drawing boundaries, and being okay with loving people away from you, and choosing to not love people. If you need to choose to not love people, then if that's what's the safest, best thing for you and your family, I feel so blessed to have the children that I have, and this incredible responsibility to protect them and raise them to be responsible, respectful human beings. And that's really difficult to do if you don't have clarity on what your boundaries and values are and what you will and won't allow into your space. But also, I don't like to approach it from the negative. I've done everything in my power to approach it from the positive. The being very curious, the being kind with boundaries, right? Being engaging, being participating in life, but knowing what boundaries are. One of the things that my dad did teach me that I loved was I wanted more privileges at one point as a teenager, right? We all want privileges, Unfortunately, today we may have a little bit more enabled, very privileged society to some extent, but when I was growing up, you had to earn your privileges. And my dad said to me, with equal, you want rights and privileges? Well, with that comes equal respect and responsibility. And so I did have to earn it, and I did have to do my part to maintain those privileges. And I did, and I value that. And I've always taught my kids that, and also the significance of consequences. The consequence, every choice leads to a new series of choices, because there's a consequence that leads to new options, And it doesn't mean you make every right choice, but you can fix it. You can't go back, but you can adjust. And being able to see that, I told my daughter when she was about 14 or 15, she was probably 14. She was a very young freshman in high school. And I said, these grades are your grades. They travel with you, not me. The choices you make, if you have sex, the consequences that come with that travels with you, not me. Diseases, pregnancy, broken hearts. These are your stories, not mine. I will love you. I will care about you, but they're yours. And every choice you make leads to a new story, a new chapter in your story that travels with you. So be careful what stories you let become part of your book. And so I felt like that really impacted her willingness to own her choices. And that she knew, I'm going to love you unconditionally. I'm not going to like every choice. I'm going to love you. And once she realized she had the power to make those decisions, and she realized the significance of the consequences, they were hers, it really shifted. I saw a shift in her instantly. And I've seen the same thing with my son. And so, those setting expectations, setting boundaries, having values and a belief system, having a mindset of victory, I think that's how you break the unhealthy cycles. And you have to just create clarity for, okay, I've always lived with this idea I would live to be 99 and a half years old. What do I want my legacy to look like? What do I want my book, my story, when I look back, what do I want my children and grandchildren to say about me? And part of the reason it's 99 and a half is my great-grandmother lived to be 99 and a half, and I was a teenager when she passed, and she was the most vivacious, incredible, strong, coherent, engaged woman. She got a nursing license when she was in her late 70s, and went and cared for other people into her 90s. And I think she was about 95 or 96 when she decided to put herself in a nursing home so she could have people to hang out with all the time. And she just was the most awesome woman. And I'm like, it's in my gene pool, right? Genetically, I get to live to be 99 and a half, and I'm going to be sharp as a tack, and I'm going to be active and fun and happy and vivacious. But you don't get there if you don't make a choice and a clear vision of what that looks like before you get there. So I've just been creating a roadmap for myself. And every time I fail, I just stand up, I dust myself off. We're going to fail forward, and we are still victorious. You can't win big without loss. You can't prevail without the falls. They're just inevitable. And I have decided that a lot of the failures and a lot of the falls and a lot of the grief and the pain and the trauma is because I am not a firm believer that God only gives you what you can bear to handle. I do not believe that for 1 second. Because if that were the case, we wouldn't grow. I think he gives us just more than we can handle, and he trusts us to grow into it and trusts us to handle it. And I also believe that our stories our messages, and we're the messengers, and we're supposed to shed a light on things that people need perspective and wisdom and inspiration, because some situations really take the wind out of our sails. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we feel like we're all alone, and sometimes we think we're the only person who's ever been here, but we're not. We're never all alone, and we're never the only person who's been there. And if you can figure out and find, like we're talking about cancer patients earlier, there's all kinds of communities for cancer patients. Heck, there's communities for AA, right? Like you can be an alcoholic and have a club as you go into your, I'm going to be clean and sober. There's not a lot of communities for, man, I'm surviving the pains and strains of life. There's not a community for Trauma Survivors Anonymous. There's not. And so when you have to go buy books or go to a therapist or go to a church, and that's great for some people, but it's not what everybody wants and needs. So whether it's through a podcast or a news story, or heck, sometimes just watching an animal story on the dodo is very therapeutic and healing, right? So you have to find your way to heal. You can never be hopeless. You can never be hopeless. You can be sad. You can go through it. You can draw your boundaries. You can be sad. You have to draw boundaries, but you have to have boundaries. You have to have self-love. You have to have self-love. And that can be a hard thing for people who've been through a lot of trauma. So it can be a hard thing for everybody, I think. But it took me a long time to think I was pretty. And I mean, I thought I had a beautiful heart, but I didn't ever even like to look at myself in a mirror. I was so traumatized from some of the abuse I'd been through. And it took a long time to say I was beautiful. So guess what? One year I decided my word of the year was beautiful. And I embraced that word. And my belief was I'm beautiful from the inside out. And I want everybody I engage with to feel beautiful for our experience. And I want to create beauty and impact in the world. And Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote a poem about success. And one of the things that he said was, leaving our mark on the world, and whether it's leaving a child, having a child, or planting a garden, or writing something, a poem or a story or something. And it's like we are all successful. We are all victorious. We are all having an impact. Make your mark on the world and make it count, and use your superpowers for good. And everybody can.
So let's go to the using your superpowers for good. So what kind of brought this up was the Sound of Freedom, and I don't know if it's that it's more prevalent now, or if it's just more brought to light now because of media and our reach or whatever. But I mean, we hear more and more about children in these abusive situations, whether it's like yours with a family member or being trafficked across countries.
Yeah.
What do you see as a way that, like, the average person, what should we look out for? How can we help people in this?
Those are great questions. I wish I had really great answers for that. I know that sometimes I have conversations with people, and there's just keywords they say. There's something they say or do that makes me go, oh, you've been there. You know the story. You've either been personally affected or you know somebody close to you who has. And I find that with sexual abuse and with suicide. Those are two topics that are very taboo. People don't like to talk about them. They're uncomfortable. They are heart-wrenching. There's a lot of grief. There's a lot of misunderstandings, and also I think a lot of guilt. People just don't know how to, when you find out, I mean, I'm sure you know somebody who's been molested or raped besides me, right? And when they share this story, what's your first reaction? I'm sorry? Or you don't know what to say? I mean, it kind of depends on who it is you're talking to, right? So I think one, by having curious conversations where you actually listen to listen instead of listen to respond and start hearing things people say, people will tell you who they are if you'll let them, right? They'll share with you their scars that you can't see if you pay close enough attention. None of us are going to save everybody or help everybody, but when people share those stories, to be able to empathize or sympathize, and to be able to say, I'm sorry that you went through that, that you had that experience, and is there some way I can support you? Is there something you need? Different people are at different stages, right? Children, obviously, I have a firm belief that a lot of young girls who are misbehaving, behaving badly, or being defiant, there's things possibly going on in their world. And I'm not saying you should be judgmental and assume they're being violated or molested, but it can even be their parents aren't parenting intentionally and it's not that you can fix this, it's just kind of the way life is right now, is parents, they don't know what to do with a child with an opinion. And a lot of times what people do is they hand you a tablet. Here's a phone, here's a tablet, here's a video game, like get out of my hair. That's the world we live in today, unfortunately. So whether it's abuse by neglect, whether it's abuse by verbal abuse, physical abuse, even speaking into, your words are so powerful, and even speaking into your children and saying things like, I can't wait till you go back to school. I'm so sick of summer. You're exhausting me. That is abuse. That is not love. Do your kids exhaust you? Yeah, guess what? That's kid 101. They're going to exhaust you. So does your pet, if you're real about it, right? I mean, they're maintenance. They require a lot. They require food and clothing and shelter and driving them, your mom taxi, dad taxi. But if you raise them with love and leadership and intention and accountability and responsibility and respect, they will reflect that. Children who are abused, I think that they either shut down or they get really defiant. But everybody's different. It's hard to say, how do you identify it? How do you know what to do? It's such a hard thing. I think it's so rampant, actually, far more. You said something to the effect, is it new? Is it happening more? Or is there just more light on it? What's the oldest profession in the world? They always say prostitution is the oldest profession in the world. I have wondered if prostitution is the oldest profession in the world. Two questions I have. One, was that a necessity to survive? Was it a necessity to protect the predators and pedophiles from touching the children? Right? And if prostitution's the oldest profession, then I have to assume that human trafficking is the second oldest. There's a lot of sexuality. There's this human nature, this chemistry, this attraction. It's just part of humanity. It's gone on as long as time, and so I don't think it's ever going to change. But it is rampant. I don't think The Sound of Freedom is a new story. That film was actually made 5 or 6 years ago, and I happened to meet. I met Paul Hutchinson and Tim Hubbard. Why is his last name escaping me now? Other Tim. I met them at an event they were actually being honored at for Operation Underground Railroad, and that Tony Robbins was the executive producer. He's a motivational speaker. he's gone on operations with them. He paid to sponsor the film. I have other friends who work the border and who work operation underground railroad. I don't know what to call it exactly. When they go out in the field on a mission, I guess it's a mission,
Yeah.
right?
Operation.
Yeah, mission. So, Tim Ballard, thank you. The stories but the stories, they just hurt your heart. There are stories here in Longview, though. I mean, there's a filmmaker, Michael Lyons, made a film in Longview, Texas, The Runaways, The Runners, and Texas, I-20, I-10 are huge corridors for human trafficking. And a friend, Amanda Flor-Zakowski, wrote a book called Unraveled, and it's inspired. She wrote the book because while she was in a grocery store here in town with two of her little children, she was being cornered in the store, and people were trying to take her children from her by engaging and being, oh, aren't they cute? And oh, this, oh, that. And she got so frazzled, she grabbed both her kids and left everything and went to the car and left the store. But she felt like if for a second she had tried to pay or taken her eyes off her kids, they would have walked out the door with one of her children. And at that time, there was a situation where there were some white vans in grocery store parking lots, and people saying something's not right, and there's some attempted kidnappings going on. So they'll take anybody. They'll take 2-year-olds, infants, 10-year-olds, 20-year-olds. They're fair game. They can be used and traded, and it's a horrible, horrible thing. But I wish I had a better answer, like what to see. I think what I can say is, one, if you're being abused, stop it, end it. If you're in a familial situation, a friends and family, you're not being trafficked, but do what it takes to end it. Get help, go to the authorities, go to somebody you trust, take a knife to bed with you, protect yourself. Do whatever it takes. End that cycle. End the abuse. And I was going to say something else. I totally forgot. But I think that we have to take a certain amount of accountability. I mean, I can't imagine how long it would have gone on had I not ended the abuse coming in. And it's not to say I didn't experience other abuse. Don't get me wrong. 15, I was stupid, went to a party, was drinking. I don't drink. I didn't drink. I got raped that night. I felt like it was my fault. It wasn't my fault. But I shouldn't have been there. So make choices. That's why I explained to my daughter, every choice you make leads to a consequence that becomes part of your story. It's your story. I have my story. I don't like every page of my story, but I can live with them, and they are part of my strength today because I let them be my strength and not my weight. And then I was raped a few years later. I wasn't drinking at all. I just walked in, wrong time, wrong place, wrong person, and you know what? That person, he later committed suicide. His life changed in that moment. He did something. He was very drunk. He did something he shouldn't have done. He regretted it as soon as he realized what happened. And I never spoke to him again, and he had been a very good friend in high school. And he committed suicide about 10 years ago. But he never functioned after that. He should have been this aspiring, successful person. It shut his life down. So to be honest with you, that's not that was not my wish for him. I actually truly wish he had come to me and apologized, and I probably would have forgiven him. Right? I wasn't going to forgive my uncle. My uncle was a repeat offender on purpose, without alcohol, just being a selfish, horrible human being. This young man was a stupid 17-year-old kid, drunk, maybe high, I don't know, but it was stupid. It was a stupid moment. It shouldn't have destroyed his life, and it did. It didn't destroy mine. did not destroy mine. It hurt, but it did not destroy mine.
Well, I got no more questions. Thank you so much, honestly, for sharing this story. And
Yes.
I mean, I know you don't know anything about this podcast, but like, thanks for going ahead and sharing this for the first time on here.
Yeah.
It really means a lot. And
thank you.
hopefully it'll reach people and help people.
I hope it does. I hope people find the help, the resources, the communities. Don't be alone. Don't isolate. Find the help and support and pray, but believe in yourself through it and choose to be victorious.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for sitting through this entire episode. If you would like to support this channel and help me spread more stories like this, please like and subscribe.